Welcome to the Influence Experiment, where we seek to explore the art and the science of building influential capacity. Every month, we want to raise thought-provoking ideas of how you can be an investor of the influence you carry. If you're ready to journey with us, then it's time to experiment.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Influence Experiment as we continue to learn how to invest our influence well. Well, today we are talking about the creative design. We live in a very creative world. Things are being created every day. Movies, magazines, food, blankets, songs, TikTok videos, planes, buildings, babies, candles, flowers, cell phones, sports balls, paintings, romantic novels, lawnmowers, and much, much more. Behind everything created is a creative. Creatives innovate, invent, formulate, design, and develop. They trial and error until the product they are working on is complete and ready to be produced to the world. What is this creative design? Why is creativity important in our world? Are there things to avoid in creating? These and questions and more will be answered by a creative master, Ryan Miller. So Ryan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for having me. I don't know about the creative master thing, but hey, I'm here and I'll give it my best shot.
I love it. And just again, thank you so much for kind of hopping on with me. Would you be able to share a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah. So again, my name's Ryan Miller. I work at Sight and Sound. It's a theater here in Lancaster. We have another one in Branson as well. Basically, we do really big, epic Bible stories live on stage. So we have like huge sets and animals and like 50 cast members and all of that. It's just big, epic Bible stories that we also really try and get just a lot of impactful content and like heart-moving things. We like to say we try and move hearts towards God through the power of story and the Bible stories especially. And I've been there for a long time. Basically pretty much my entire adult career has been there. And it's been awesome. I love it. So, yeah.
That's incredible.
And I guess I should say currently right now, I've done a lot. I started in art and media when I was about 18, like just scanning pictures. And then I became a video editor there, the photographer, shot a lot of video, started directing TV spots and video shoots and DVDs, and worked on a lot of the media and the shows. And then about 3.5 years ago, they asked me to produce David, which opens in March. Yep. So I started on that in 2018. And opening day will be 4 years of working on the same thing.
Wow,
today,
that's cool.
Today, that's cool. We were in a meeting and someone asked, like, what's everyone's favorite project that they've done in the last year? And I was like, I haven't finished anything in the last year. I was like, I literally haven't had any. Anyway, I've been working on one thing for a long time.
That's crazy.
Yeah, looking forward to that and excited about it. But that's
awesome.
What I'm currently doing. So.
I love that so much. So hey, like here's a question for you. Like, what would you say is like the coolest in your mind, the coolest thing you've ever created?
Okay, I'm not exactly sure. I will say one of the more recent ones that I know I'm super proud of, and a lot of my teammates are proud of as well, was Queen Esther Live last year. So we've been shooting our shows to be put on DVDs for over 10. We started in 2005, so it's been 15 years that we've been working on those. And I used to edit those, and then I started directing them in 2013 was the first one I actually directed. But we never did them live. So we would shoot the show. We would spend a year in post-production editing it, packaging it, getting it ready, and releasing it out. And when COVID hit, we were just we shut down for like months, and we were trying to just come up with new ideas. And so this awesome guy I got to work with, Dean, he had this idea, like, what if we do a live like broadcast of our show? And it seemed so insane and really impossible. But like, I get to work with just some of the most amazing people ever, and we pulled it off. And it just with COVID, I mean, literally wondering like, are people even going to be healthy enough to do this? Like, is it even possible to like broadcast our show live and have it be done in a cool way and not just like a camera in the back, you know?
Yeah.
Because our shows are just really, there's just a lot going on.
Yeah.
And like, it's hard to even find 50 people on stage, all in costumes and all of that. And so it just kind of felt impossible, and we pulled it off, and it was awesome. And it was just a really, really cool moment. Just one of those like layered moments because of COVID, and like, is this possible? And it was live, and so there were people across like 80 countries tuning in live.
Wow.
And like, it just felt like a really cool moment. So that was definitely up there. So
that is a pretty neat milestone marker accomplishment. I love that. That's so cool. Yeah. So even as you work at Sight and Sound, you're working on the script with David even right now. Like the question I have for you is, and this is probably no small question, but like walk us through a little bit of the creative design of building a script. For Sight and Sound. How does that look like? Yeah.
So really, like, the script is an element, and it's definitely a very, very important element. But the goal is, you want every single costume, every set piece, every song, every single even lighting fixture working together to tell the story. So it's almost like the story is up here, like almost capital S, there's the story. And then the script, it comes under that. And even I would say comes under, for us, an important part of our process is the theme. And so the very first thing that we do when we produce a show is we spend a lot of time, a lot of prayer, and a lot of research into what is the theme of the show going to be. And then that almost becomes the wall that's like decides what sticks to it. You know what I mean? And so for David, we spent months praying about the theme. And with him, it was like the theme could be shepherd, it could be communion, it could like relation with God, it could be the fear of the Lord, it could be worship, it could be slay your giants, it could be like there were so many things to choose from. And after just like a really honestly like pretty amazing like Holy Spirit felt like anyway, like just encounter people, even Scott, like on a Sunday morning, like preaching a whole sermon. That was like exactly what we needed to hear. Like it all pointed to this theme of like, it's all about David's relationship with God. Everything else, like everything in the story has to somehow like fit into that. And so that becomes the wall that you're seeing if the spaghetti sticks to, So every single thing that happens in his life that you're trying, like people ask all the time, like there's all this content, how do you decide what makes it in or not? And the main thing is, what is that theme? So actually, like for Jesus, for instance, the theme was love that rescues. So we went after all those stories of Jesus going after that one person and rescuing them. Mary Magdalene.
I see it.
The demoniac in Gadarenes, where he went all the way across the Sea of Galilee, delivered one dude, and then like went back, and then obviously Peter in the waves, and just so that, when you have thousands of stories about Jesus, and you're like, how do you decide what ones? It's like, well, you pick your theme and everything gets filtered through that.
Sure.
And so that's like the big one. And then just practically, again, if we're talking about just the script, you start finding all those moments in his life that work with that theme, and you start stringing them together, and you make an outline. Once you have an outline, that was like literally a bunch of pieces of paper up on my wall for a while. I got to work with an amazing writer who just started writing scenes, and it's like, sometimes it's like he would write a scene, it's like, that is perfect, and it's barely been rewritten in 3 years of working on it. And then there's other ones that like literally hit version 30 of rewrites, where you just literally throw it away and start over, throw it away and start over. Then just if you're again just on the process of the script specifically, we have other just stepping points where we'll share it with the design team, share it with our chief creative officer, And then we also did a read through where we brought the whole cast, not the whole, but we brought 15 cast members, and they just sat on stage and read it for about like 70 people that we brought in that weren't even all employees. And then we just had like a talk back session. Like, were you following the story? Did you like it? Did you hate our lead character, or did you like him because we want you to like him, you know, and all that? And got a lot of feedback, and then another round of revisions, and we're still rewriting, and we'll be rewriting till opening day. But that's how it goes. But it's been pretty locked in for about almost a year now.
Wow.
So anyway, as far as the script, we're still doing a lot of other stuff.
I can imagine, and like even as you like spoke into that, like I thought the kind of the piece I almost extracted from that was you saying like you found a theme and you focused in on it and you ran with it, and I think that that's a crucial part of what I can see is like being a creative is like finding the piece that you kind of focus in on and now build off of that. And then another part that you said was like you're with all the sticky notes and you're like up to version 30, right? And there's that part of me that's like, oh, like that's totally a thing too, right? Going through all these renditions of what the idea is, but even as you get to version 30, sometimes there's this thing that comes into play that we could call like writer's block or creativity block, and you just get to version 30 and you're still not content, or you're at version 1 and you have nowhere to go from there. Like, what are there any moments for you that you create a creativity block, and how do you work through that?
Yeah, so it definitely happens. I will say our situation is a little bit different because we're not creating something out of nothing, you know. We have a general framework. Like we're bringing Bible stories to life. So like, I'm not like going, okay, I want him to kill this giant, then what should happen? I have no idea. Like, no, it's written there. We can read it.
Sure, right.
We have historical. So so like even my experience with creative or writer's block or whatever is going to be different than like if you're working at Pixar and you're literally creating like Up, the movie, out of nothing.
Sure.
Like that's going to be very different experiences. For me, it definitely feels more like problem solving, where it's like, how am I going to take 80 years of this guy's life and fit it into 2 hours and 10 minutes, you know, and a 20-minute intermission for a 2 hour and 30-minute experience.
Sure.
Like,
that's no small task.
It feels a lot more like problem solving just all the time. But yeah, so it's definitely different because you do have some sort of a framework, but you're definitely, working through problems a lot.
Well, and I think that the idea that you expressed of like problem solving, like understanding, okay, like if there's a problem, then typically there's a solution behind it, right? And we're going to work towards the solution and not just like, oh, okay, you know what? Forget it. It's not worth it. Or like, oh, like, but being able to say, okay, I'm going to work towards the solution and that's usually a pretty gritty thing to do at times.
Yes. And on that, I will say, I feel like there's almost a spectrum that I experience anyway. There's of artists and creatives, right? There's definitely like what I would almost say is like your stereotypical artist who's like, I just have to be creative and I have to like go and just want to like live in coffee shops and all of that. And like, I'll work when I feel inspired. Then there's this other side, and I fall more on this side where I'm like, there's a brick wall and the creative block is just like a brick wall, and I'm just going to like hit this thing until I break it down. And like, I will not stop. Yeah. And like, I work with both types, and both are actually a problem, honestly. Like, I know of somebody who their manager started taking their computer on Fridays so that they wouldn't take it home and work all weekend. All right. Because they were like that. They're like, I didn't solve my creative problem yet, and it doesn't matter that it's 4:30 on a Friday. Like, I'm gonna work on it literally till 1 o'clock tonight and all weekend long. And like, I'm not gonna stop until I solve the creative problem. And that's like not healthy. But then the flip side is if you're just like, I'll create when I feel like it, like that's not healthy either. So I had to learn how to like let things go at some times, and like, I'm just gonna let that one rest, and I'll come back to it in a day or a week or a month and hopefully get some sort of inspiration between now and then. So I had to move this way. other people need to move this way to hopefully find that like happy balance in the middle, you know?
And even then you're talking about people who are more hired to be a creative versus like someone who just is like, it's a side gig or a hobby and they can be creative whenever they feel like it, but more so within the framework of someone who's hired to be a creative.
Exactly.
And can totally see that tension or the ditch on both sides of the road.
Yeah.
So even when you think about creating, what's the difference between, or is there a difference between creating just for yourself versus creating for others?
Yeah. So on that, there's almost like two paths there. The one is if you're creating for others, it does take a lot of research and time and thought to get into the head of your audience. Like you want to know your audience. You want to know what they're going to like. And that can be tough because if you're like, if you're like a 20-year-old creative guy and you get hired by Hallmark to make cards for 50-year-old women, like that's going to be a problem. You can't just make stuff that you're going to want to buy. You're going to have to like know your audience.
Sure. And
that's totally possible. Yeah. Like a 20-year-old dude can learn how to make an amazing card that a 50-year-old woman might want to buy.
Yeah.
And that's great. So like definitely if you're creating and hired to create for other people, it's definitely different than just creating what you want to make. The other component of it is if creating something is like literally how you put bread on the table, food on the table, like you don't get to just have writer's block or be like, I don't feel creative today, so I'll try again tomorrow. Like you have to learn how to create pretty much under any circumstance. Like if you feel terrible today, and I don't mean like everyone can have a sick day, but I just mean like if you're just like having a terrible day, you still have to learn how to come in and like paint a beautiful picture if you're an artist. Or if you're an actor, which I work with a lot of actors at Sight and Sound, like they can be having a terrible day. They need to learn how to literally come in and act like everything is amazing, you know? Yeah. Or if they're having a great day, they need to like learn how to act and be really sad, you know? And so learning as a creative how to work and do amazing work regardless of how you feel and what your present circumstances are is really tough because, we have a lot of employees who've been working over there at Sight and Sound for like 10, 15, 20 years, and like life happens. Like you have relatives who pass away or are sick or car problems or just anything.
Literally anything.
And just like anything that can make you have a terrible day. And you don't get to just be like, I don't feel creative today. Yeah. Because it's how you're paying your bills.
Sure.
So that's just like a whole thing.
Well, it's a fascinating nuance because even as a pastor, like I can get that. Like where there are days I'm not feeling spiritual, I'm not feeling like deeply connected with God in this moment, but that sometimes it doesn't matter. I still need to crank out a sermon. Yeah. And sometimes that's really difficult. And so I can see the nuance of that and how that can be difficult for someone who's a creative or called to be a creative within their line of work. Yeah. And so like what would you even say is like the creative process? Like what does that look like or feel like to you specifically?
Yeah. So I come from I didn't grow up as a farmer, but I grew up in Lancaster County, and both sides of my families were like generations of farmers, like up until me. Yeah. But I definitely feel like I inherited that like work ethic. So that's why I was saying before, I'm like on this side where it's like there's a creative brick wall, and I'm just gonna hit it until I break through, and had to actually learn to back off of that a little bit. But for me, like a lot of times I feel like the creative process is trying to get, like it's almost if like Lewis and Clark trying to get. You generally know where you want to get, but you have no idea really how you're going to get there or like what obstacles there might be on your way. But like you definitely aren't going to get anywhere if you just sit here and think about it. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I'm definitely more on that like. I'm just going to try this path until it's a dead end. And then I'll go back and I'll try this path until that's a dead end. And I'll try this path until that's a dead end. And that's how you get 30 versions of a scene in a script. Sure. But you want to just try stuff fast and you want to fail quickly because it's like the Edison thing. Like you just want to try as many things figure out how many are the wrong idea until you get to the right one. The other one I always, like, I literally think about this is like that parable. I shouldn't really use this as a parable. That parable of Jesus talking about the kingdom of heaven is like a guy who finds a treasure in a field, right? Mm-hmm. So a lot of times to me, the creative process feels like somebody went, here's like a few acres somewhere. There is there's treasure. Just start digging. Right. And so it's like, all right, I'm going to dig this hole. Nope, it wasn't there. I'm going to dig this hole now. Nope, it wasn't there. And that's where, if you can think of it that way, like, is every hole that you dug that you didn't find treasure a failure? No. It's just part of the process. Yeah. Unless someone told you this is where it is, you just have to like dig. And you have to like move a lot of dirt until you finally find that like one great idea that you're like, okay, I found it. We're good now. We can move on. Yeah. And if you're, for instance, like, and it's totally okay to not like that process. Like, there are people who come in to Sight and Sound, just to be honest, who are like, they like to be handed blueprints and build blueprints. Yeah. And if you're wired that way, that's great.
Sure.
It's probably not a good idea to get into like theater.
Yep, I can see it.
And that's totally fine. Like, and I can understand, but like, theater is not that. And the creative process in any industry that you're being creative is not that. It's like trying to find, the Pacific Ocean without a map. Like, you're going to make so many wrong turns, and you're going to come across the Rocky Mountains that you had no idea were there, and you're going to come across whatever, and you just have to navigate it and figure it out, Yeah. Yeah.
No, that's really good, and thanks for being able to speak into that, because I do think that there is a lot of persistence and intentionality that needs to be found in trying to find what you're looking for with those ideas. Yeah. And so that is a really good kind of aspect to speak towards. And so another thing that I would love for you to speak to is this idea, is that to be a creative designer is to have rhythms in the way that you do your craft. How do your spiritual rhythms intersect with your creative rhythms? What would you say to that?
Yeah. So for about let's see here. I'm going to say about 12 years of my work, I would joke and say, my inspiration is it's due Friday. Like, that was, that's where I got my inspiration. It was like, my boss comes to me, he's like, you need to make this thing. It needs to be awesome. And it's due Friday. Like, that's an exaggeration, but also sometimes just like the reality. Like, there were times where it's like, hey, we need to send out an annual mailer. It's going to 1.5 million people. And we have a week to figure it out and make it and get it to the printer go. And you're just like, okay, here we go. But a lot of times I was in the design team. So I was working under people who are casting the vision, and you're coming behind them and trying to you're catching their vision that they've done a lot of research on, and you're just trying to support their vision. The thing that I had to learn when producing a show was now sort of like my job to cast that vision. So that was a very new process for me, and I found to be like a really life-giving process that I've just really come to like. And what really started to develop out of it, especially with the theme of David being communion and like being with God and his relationship with God, it's like the idea of co-laboring with Christ, that Paul talks about. It's like, I'm doing this thing and I'm doing it with God. And so how is my prayer life? How am I taking him the creative problems that I'm having? Again, where my natural instinct would be like, here's my creative problem. I'm just going to pound until I figure it out.
Go through the wall.
Now I had to learn how to be like, okay, I am just going to go for a walk right now and pray. Or I'm going to sit in my office for an hour and just pray and really try and seek the Lord and do this with him, as opposed to just running and gunning on my own, which is kind of how I was operating for a long time. And it's been really cool. And to use something from David, I know I'll make theologians angry here, because I know a lot of people are like, you are not David, and like Goliath is not your problems, right? Like Jesus, like David is a type of Christ slaying the giant for you. And I totally get that. And I understand the point that they're making. At the same time, like David picked up a sling and a stone and walked out onto a battlefield and like killed Goliath. Like you can give him more credit for it than even like Joshua in the wall of Jericho or something. Like he did actually have to do something.
Right.
And what I love even out of that Psalm 23 verse is like, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for what? You are with me.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, there is this element of like, we're not just like these passive things that are like, we are working on something, co-laboring with God. And there's like a really beautiful relationship that happens there. Like some of my best and most life-giving relationships in my life are with people that I've worked with, you know, because you're just, there's something about being in the trenches with somebody and like working together and accomplishing a task that just builds such like cool relationship. And when I started realizing that's kind of like what's happening between me and God right now over the last like 3.5 years of really intentionally focusing on working on this project with him and constantly checking in with him, and like just continuing to go back to him in prayer as much as I possibly can until I have that feeling of like a sense of, I really feel in my core that this is the right decision, you know. Or at times I've really prayed for a long time, sometimes a really long time, and ended up having peace and feeling settled about the fact that I don't feel settled about something and that for whatever reason, he doesn't want me to know that answer yet, but he will in a month or 2 months or 6 months or whatever, you know, but trusting in that relationship with him. Sometimes it feels like Jacob wrestling with the angel where it's like, come on, why aren't you giving me this answer? You know, but even in that, there's like a cool relationship thing happening that I've found really amazing. So
no, I think that's a beautiful answer to respond with, as you're talking about, communing with God, communing with others, and taking time to pray. I think is those are vital spiritual rhythms, obviously, but even to tie them into the creative process, I think is a really beautiful element to it all. So I think that's really, really cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so now talking kind of about a almost generic kind of leadership question within being a creative, like how can creativity in leadership be a useful trait? What would you say?
Yeah, so I think one of it does depend on how you're defining creativity. If you're defining creativity as like, here's a blank piece of paper, create something beautiful, that's hard. I don't even feel very creative if I define it that way. If you define it more like out-of-the-box thinking or being willing to go, hey, if we've never done this thing, like let's say, Sight and Sound, we've been around for like 45 years this year. So we've been doing this for like a long time. Yeah. But every once in a while, it's good to have somebody go, why are we doing this like this? You know what I mean? Yeah. Or like, if we've never done this before, how would we do it? Like how many of these things are just, and so even if you don't feel creative, I think anybody can ask those types of questions. Why are we doing it this way? And if the answer is that's just how we've always done it, do not settle for that answer. Not settle for that answer at all.
Speaking my language.
Yeah. And so that to me, I think, is the biggest thing. Like just being willing to really look at things with a fresh set of eyes and be like, why are we doing it like that? And do we have to? And sometimes there's a really good reason we do something a certain way, but 100%. Sometimes there's not. And it's always good to hold the magnifying glass over something and see.
The way that I word that is someone who comes in and asks questions, they're the Potster, and that is definitely me. And so, and I don't have shame to that. However, at the same time, sometimes the answer is, this is the best way to do things and it needs to stay as such. Yeah. And that really is the right answer sometimes. Other times, nope, let's blow it up. Yeah, and that's the answer I like to hear when that comes. What would you say about what are the traits that a leader or influencer should carry as they attempt to create? What would you say to that?
I think one big one, and this is sort of like obvious, but it's shocking to me how sometimes not obvious it is, but like treat people really well. Like, especially if you're leading creatives, they're just not going to create well if they feel terrible and if you're making them feel terrible. So that's one of the things I don't understand when you hear stories about like directors in Hollywood and stuff with like big egos who scream at people on set, is I'm just like, you're shooting yourself in the foot. Even if all you care about is making something great that makes you look good, you're still going to do that better if you're treating the people like even if you don't care about them at all. Like, let's just say you're a terrible person and all you want is to make yourself look good. You will accomplish that better if the people you're working with like you and are happy. Like, it's such a no-brainer, but it seems to get lost on people, which is like so mind-boggling to me. And it's I really like to be liked. Like, that's just like kind of a core part of me. So like I know like I probably err on that side, but that it's obviously super, super important. The other one is to remember that you aren't your idea. Like, this is your idea and this is you. So you should be able to throw an idea out in a room, in a meeting, and have people criticize that idea and be totally fine at the end of the day, at the end of the meeting. Because they're not criticizing you, like they're criticizing an idea. And so that is way easier said than done. But I think crazy crucial, like really, really, really crucial to be successful, not just in leadership, but honestly just working in any creative endeavor. Because especially, again, unless you're just going to create art for yourself, you're putting it out there and like a critic is going to see it, like, you know, newspaper critic is going to write about David. And I'm already processing, if it's bad review, it doesn't mean that they're criticizing me. They're criticizing something I created, and there is a difference there. So I think that's a pretty key one. Not if you're just in leadership, but just in any creative endeavor. Separating that out is pretty key. So.
I feel like that's even a nuanced conversation that even for a whole nother podcast episode, because I think you're hitting on something that is very crucial to splice through, and like the idea of that you are not your idea. At the same time, a creative literally is pouring their soul into something. So in a small way, it is a part of them, but in a larger way, it's still not. And so like, how do we kind of like ebb and flow through that and live through the tension? Because it is a tension. But I do fully agree that there is many times if you don't like my idea, you don't like me as a person. And I think that is something we do need to be able to kind of parse out and split between the two.
Yeah, for sure.
So no, thanks for speaking into that. Is kind of, we look more into the spiritual component once again. As you create, is there anything meaningful behind understanding that God himself is also a creative? Yeah.
So, yes. Like, to answer simply, yes. Like, it's very cool. Dorothy Sayers was a contemporary. I think she was like the only female in the little club of Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and stuff. Yeah. She wrote a cool book called The Mind of the Maker, and she was kind of talking about that. Like, when we're creating something, we're so kind of close to the heart of God in the sense of like him also being creative. That being said, God also is an engineer, and he's a chemist, and he is like the best project manager, able to bring order out of chaos. You know, he is like the fullness of all of these different attributes. And so I am wary of putting creativity sort of like on this pedestal, and like totally, let's celebrate that. Yeah. But let's also celebrate the other components of who he is that gets manifested in all of the different types of people that are created. You know what I mean? By him. And like the body of Christ, it takes all of these different types of people to get this stuff done. You know what I mean? To, again, co-labor with Christ. Like, it takes all of these different things. And so you don't want to put, pastor on a pedestal over evangelist or prophet or like all, those, like the teaching gift and all of that. Like, it's all of that. Sure. And so I definitely am. Yes, I love to celebrate creativity. at the same time, I couldn't do my job without some very buttoned up people that like you wouldn't put very far on the creative spectrum. You know what I mean? But like they are, I mean, like to say that they're crucial is like the understatement of the year. Like I couldn't do anything without them.
Yeah.
And so like the true creative, like I've read secular books about this, like the true creatives that live over here, like they really can't get almost anything done without these people over here to like balance that. And it's such a cool picture. I think of like the body of Christ and all of that. And yeah, so I think that's, something that I think about a lot. I spent a lot of my career feeling like I wasn't creative enough. Like even when I draw, it's still like stick figure level, you know, and I was working in the art department. I was like, what am I doing?
That's
you know? But I even learned like, all right, so I might not be able to like, you know, thinking like a crafty person. I might not be able to like see these two sticks and some twine and like come up with some amazing thing you're like put on your dining room table. Like my mind just does not work that way at all. Like actually, to use an example, I was thinking about this. What's the guy who came up with all the Marvel comics, right? Stan Lee, right?
Yeah, well, Stan Lee.
Right?
I'm fairly positive.
I think so. I'm not a comic book geek. I would put him as like, dude, he just came up out of thin air with like crazy, like dozens of superheroes and like these amazing comic book stories and all of this that are like incredible. And I would put him like really far on like this creative spectrum. However, that's different than the guys who took that and were like, we're going to create like a 15-year movie arc that is going to tie all of these things together. Those are two very different things. One is much more logical and like methodical and planning, and one is probably a lot more like just sort of like your typical creative that can just whatever. And I can't relate to the Stan Lee. I can relate to the more planning, methodical one, but I didn't have as many examples of that in my life, so I just felt like, oh, I'm not creative, you know, end of story. But that's been something even just literally still pretty recently, like even in the last year or two, I've learned how to do creative work, even though I don't necessarily feel creative. You know what I mean?
No, that's really good. And even as you brought up Marvel, as a Marvel fanatic myself, watching a 15-year arc of stories and movies is just incredible to see how they wove there. That is a creative design at its finest. To be able to see that for anyone who appreciates Marvel. Yeah,
but they didn't create it out of thin air. All those characters were laid out and for them, you know? And so it's different types of people.
For sure. No, totally. And, you know, as we continue to like talk about even the concept of the influence experiment, it's all about finding the art and the science of building influential capacity. And so what would you say is some of the science, some of the objective truth behind the creative design, and what is some of the art, the subjective personal expression behind the creative design?
Yeah. So art is super subjective. Everybody knows that. You and I, one of us might love country and the next one, I might hate it. You might like this type of music, I might hate it. We can walk through an art museum and you're going to love half of it and hate half of it, and I'm going to love the other half and you're going to hate the other half. And like comedians talk about this, like you can't say that's objectively funny if no one laughs. End of story. It is either funny or it's not. You can still, like, I find things funny that my wife doesn't find funny, and like vice versa, you know, that's just, again, like it's subjective, but like from the comedian's perspective, he's like, if people are laughing, I've done my job, you know? So I find that the experience of art is subjective. It just is. Like, you either like something or you don't, and it's kind of hard to get out of subjectivity around that. However, I find in the creation of it and working together with people to create art, it's way healthier and better to live in the objective side because there are principles. I mean, there is music theory, there's story writing theory, there's artistic composition theory and color theory and lighting theory and costume design theory and interior design theory, and like whole books, volumes of books are written about the science behind all of those different art forms. And so it's way healthier to live in the objective side than the subjective side, in my opinion, when you're working with others. Because if you create a picture, and let's say it's a backdrop for one of our shows, right? Mm-hmm. It's going to be a backdrop. It's going to be printed out 115 feet by 30 feet, okay? And you work on it and you show it to me. If I just go, oh, I don't like that, it doesn't help you at all.
Not a lick. Yep.
Like literally doesn't help at all. And it's also making it about me and my ego as producer, because it's all about whether or not I like it, period. Mm-hmm. And if I don't like it, then that means it's not good and you have to start over, you know? And so living in the subjective, I just find in the creation process to be really unhelpful. What is really helpful is to be like, all right, you created this whole thing. Well, hey, all of these buildings have the line going this way, but like I really want everyone to actually look over here. So can you adjust all of them so that it gets your eye to look like that? Yeah, you know what I mean? Uh-huh. And you're talking, and that's like it's called lines of gaze, right? A Gaze. So it's like when you look at a picture, there's a path your eye naturally wants to take, and it's just a part of artwork, you know? Yeah. And so you can talk about this objective thing and say, oh, you need to change all this stuff, and here's why. And so I think over like 15 years of working on something, that was a skill that I had to learn. And I think I've gotten pretty good at is someone being like, hey, what do you think of this? And looking at it and immediately, a lot of times it's like your first reaction is, oh, I like this or I don't like it. But you can't just say that. You have to have, pretend like you're going before a judge and you have to prove why this is, right or not right, using more objective principles. You know what I mean? Very, very rarely I've pulled the I don't know what, it just needs to look cooler. But I really try not to do that. Sure. Because that's just that's really cruel to do to an artist. I don't know, it's not bad. It just needs to be 10% cooler. So try that, you know, and that's just not helpful, So trying to find that stuff is good. I like to live in the objective more.
Sure. Well, no, you even spoke to something fascinating right there of even knowing that if I was to create something, which you wouldn't want me to create a 150-foot banner because it would look horrible, but if I did and you just said it doesn't look good or start over or whatever, even there's a clashing of creative ideas and a clashing of personalities. And so what do you do with that? When your creativity clashes with other creative personalities, I'm sure it happens. Yeah.
So this is probably an unpopular opinion, and I'm going to talk about this. Actually, I'm going to put on my designer hat that I wore for 12 years and not my producer hat because it has come from a better place. Honestly, just knowing who has the final say clears up so much. Clear lanes and clear understanding of who makes the final decision. I know, people don't like authority and people I get that, but honestly, so much health can come. If you're working under, again, I'm talking as a designer, somebody who was under producers for a long time. Yeah, I loved it. I loved being able to be hey, here's 10 options. You get to just choose whatever one feels right to you. I have an opinion and I'll share my opinion, but there's actually comfort knowing the final decision rests with that person, And actually, I also think, again, as a designer, there was a freedom there that I think you get better ideas and more creativity out of people when they know who has the final decision. So again, when I was a designer in the design team meeting, I loved throwing out the stupidest, most wild, impossible ideas ever. Because I knew I didn't have to make the decision about whether or not that was possible or doable or not.
Oh, that's mean.
You know what I mean? Well, but in all seriousness, it's there is a clear understanding of whose decision this is. And so I can throw something out. Sure. It also allows great collaboration between designers. So when I'm a media designer, which I was for a long time, and I'm working with a lighting designer or a costume designer or whatever, we're all peers working under the producer. It allows great collaboration. Like I can go to the lighting designer and be like, dude, are you sure this scene should be green? And like we can fight about it, or we can, and he knows that like I'm just sharing an opinion. He doesn't have to change it.
Yeah.
It's different though if the art director comes and says, "Why is this green?" You know what I mean?
Right.
Or the producer says, "Why is this green?"
Yep.
So actually, I think having that clear hierarchy, as much as it sounds not like it doesn't sound creative.
Yeah.
It sounds like you would not want to put that in a book about creativity or a podcast. But I'm just from my experience, it actually is very freeing.
Well, and even as I know, many creatives don't really like the box, right? They love the freedom to go wherever they want. At the same time, having some type of a box of boundaries and healthiness within a team, within an organization, within a project is still sometimes needed to a degree, right?
Yep.
And so, no, I think that's a really good insight to provide when it comes to creativity's clashing of personalities and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Ryan, would you be able to kind of speak to an individual who is kind of new in pursuing being a creative? Like, what advice would you give to someone who is beginning the pursuit of creativity, as well as the person who maybe isn't even just a creative rut right now, feeling discouraged in their creativity? What would you say to those two types of people?
So the first one, like if you're young and you're just starting out in something, I say this with like, not at the expense of burning out, not at the expense of like destroying your soul and all of that, but like just work like crazy. Like if you're in like your 20s, like just work. Like I knew like, all right, so I didn't go to school for what I'm doing. I just was like in it. And like I said, I got hired to scan pictures, like the most base level thing ever. And just slowly over time. However, I knew that just what I was doing at work was not enough to get me to be as skilled as what I knew I needed to be. So for like years, I was working for free. And I know that's also an unpopular thing. But honestly, I was working for free for like anybody that needed video work. So churches, mission organizations. And I did love on the spiritual side, like it was a win-win because I was helping organizations who had no money to pay me, but I also was like getting better. You know what I mean? Like I wasn't just doing it out of the goodness of my heart.
Sure.
Like I knew. So I was doing weddings. I was doing like just anything.
Getting exposure
And getting experience. And again, like, oh, here's this film shoot that's happening somewhere, and just asking like, you don't even have to pay me. Can I come and just wrap cables? Like I'll wrap cables for the day. Like just anything to get experience, anything to build a reel if you're a videographer or a DP or anything like that, or a photographer, like just that was my MO. I'm not saying that's right for everybody, but I worked really hard. I had my 9 to 5 at Sight and Sound, and like I had probably 10 to 15 open projects all the time outside of that. And then I was like, I am never going to get married if I keep working this hard. And so I did back off a little bit, and then I was like, I'll never be able to afford getting married if I don't start working more.
Double-edged sword.
Yeah, exactly. On the creative rut side, if that's you, it's just a tough one. I would just say keep going. Like, keep trying new things. Don't be afraid to fail. Expose yourself to different things. Get your work in front of people and get criticism. Like, you've got to be able to just like show people your work and have them tell you it's terrible. Like, another one is like watch terrible movies and figure out why they're terrible.
Ooh, okay.
And figure out what you would do to make them better. You know, like, or read terrible books or anything you see that you're like, I don't think that's good. Because honestly, 90% of it is just being able to determine if something is good or not. And like if you're not even realizing something is bad that's bad, then you're not even working towards fixing it, you know? So try to figure out what made this movie good. Why did I watch I'll pick on a movie. Like I won't use the examples, but like I can watch this war movie that has it cuts back to the families at home, and it like just tugs at my heart, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I watch this movie, and it does the same thing, and I couldn't care less. What is that? What was the difference between these two movies?
Yeah.
You know, and not just movies, but like anything.
Sure.
Try and figure out, and I think that can stir a lot.
Yeah, because I mean, you can do that through, as you said, like reading books, watching other leaders, to watching, I don't know, YouTube videos, to so many things that you can do. A sports player watching a good versus a bad player. So
exactly.
I think that, and as long as we're being careful that we're not like judging them, but while we are learning from mistakes, from other people's mistakes or stuff like that.
Smart person learns from their mistakes. A wise person learns from other people's
There we
mistakes.
go. Yeah.
I didn't come up with that.
No.
I repeat it all the time.
No, that's so good. And no, I thought that was so good, Ryan, because even as you spoke to the person the young person, and you were just like get out there and just keep on working, and not the expense of yourself. And I want to echo that thought, because again, like we can never, and I know you would echo this thought, but we can never neglect that self-care. We can never neglect the fact that we are a finite being, and we need to connect back with the ultimate creative, which is God himself. And so if that's something that you wrestle with even as a creative, and you want to put yourself out there and put yourself out there, and that's such a needed thing, but we also want to make sure that we don't burn ourselves out. And so if you hadn't gotten a chance to listen to episode 21 and 22 of the Influence Experiment, they are all about soul care and margin, and kind of how to live that life well in tandem with working with excellence.
I'm about halfway through them. It's been really cool. I like that one.
That's so good. I love that. And so, man, as we begin to land the plane on this, man, like what would you say, like any resources, books, videos, articles that could help people if they wanted to pursue further study and learning about the creative design?
It's tough. So for me, like I am a little bit of a jack of all trades. So like I don't entirely know where to begin. I will say just a couple off the top of my head. There was a book by Ed Catmull, who helped found Pixar, called Creativity Inc. And that's like, if you're in any kind of corporate creative situation, that's like a must read. Like it's just really, really, really good. If you want to understand story, there's literally a book called Story that's like this thick, and it's like the Bible for how to like tell great stories. And it's like a green book. I think it's just called Story. I forget who it's by. There's another one by a guy named John Truby, I think. It's shorter. It's about like the 22 steps. There's also a really cool resource. Just Google Hero of 1,000 Faces, and it really talks about the hero's journey and how every big epic story kind of has the same path through it. It's pretty interesting. 2 YouTube ones that I like. One is called Lessons from the Screenplay, and it dives into movies, and it compares movies. It'll take a scene and just dissect the scene. Fascinating. Like, even if you're not that into movies or not that into videos, or into acting or anything like that, story, it's just really interesting stuff. The other one that I really like is, I think it's called Nerd Writer. There's one's called Nerdist, and one's called Nerd Writer. One of them's weird. One of them is also kind of weird, but cool. And this guy, he does, I think it's Nerd Writer, but he'll take a painting and just dissect it, or a movie and dissect it, or a song and dissect it, and like explain like, why is this good or why is this bad, and like break down some of that objective stuff that I was talking about. And you can just learn a ton in sort of all creative. If you're in any creative, from art to photography to video to theater to graphic design, you'll learn something from that guy. It's pretty interesting.
No, I love that. Thanks for giving all those different resources from books and some videos. I think that could be really helpful for those who wanted to explore that further. And I'll be intrigued to maybe go check some of those out myself. Yeah. And so, Ryan, man, would you have any final words of wisdom, advice that you would love to leave with our listeners and viewers today?
Yeah. The thing that really just came to mind for me is something my grandpa told me a long time ago. My grandpa was super creative, crazy creative artist, and also I got a lot of my hardworking genes partly from him. But he just said, he's like, I remember him saying one time, the creative process, creating anything is just hard work. Like, it just takes so much energy and so much of yourself. He's like, just put all of that energy, make sure you're putting all that energy into something that matters. Like, he's like, just make sure that whatever you're putting that much effort into actually matters. And he wasn't even saying that it has to be like preaching the gospel or, something really mission focused or something like that. But just like, does it matter? Like, do I feel really good about what I'm creating? Is it gonna like inspire people? Is it gonna uplift people? Is it gonna challenge people? Is it gonna get them to think differently about something? Or is it just gonna like help them veg out for 20 minutes at the end of their day? Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not like, I don't want to like judge people, but it's definitely something I think about a lot, because it does just take a lot out of you when you're creating something. And so, I try and make stuff that matters, Yeah. I like thinking about it in that way. So, because it's not easy. It's definitely hard. So, anyway.
No, and I think that creating with a purpose, having that mindset, even as we've woven some other words of like intentionality and focus and grit and all that stuff is so needed as you kind of do this, and knowing that that's the posture that we need to kind of leave with our listeners and viewers here, to say that this is not like it's a long haul. Like it's not like sometimes it's a sprint, but more times than not it's a marathon, and building something that that you deeply care about. And that's a worthwhile endeavor for sure. And so, Ryan, even as you got the chance to sit and process this conversation with me, I can just even see, how much of a passionate creative you are. And what is super cool for me is just to be able to learn from you in this time. And even though I wouldn't dub myself as a deep creative, like I feel like I have some creative genes, not the 150-foot banner that for sight and sound, but I have other ways I can. And so to be able to learn from you and to kind of see some of the things that you get to put into practice as a friend, and then also as the creative is really, really neat. And so thanks for being willing to speak into this and to share some of your insights. Speaking from successes and from failures together is a gift. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, man. It's awesome.
Absolutely. And if you are enjoying listening to this and you're liking what you're hearing, and would you be willing to give us a rating or hit the share button wherever you consume the content? And so we'll hope that you will join us next time as we continue to explore the art and science of building influential capacity. Catch you next time.